Excellent!
This motherboard here is the ASUS Maximus VIII Formula, or M8F for short, and as ROG motherboards go, it sits just below the Maximus VIII Extreme in the ASUS Z170 lineup. The Formula has a lot to offer though, and traditionally it even gets a feature or two that the Extreme version does not, such as a built-in VRM water block by EK. And we can't forget that sexy RGB lighting support as well, as this is ASUS' best answer to the motherboard RGB LED arms race that kicked off last year with the MSI X99 Godlike launch at Computex. The M8F might not be the first RGB LED motherboard, but it has a pretty solid claim to being the first one to get it right. And with the unmistakably badass ROG armor and a laundry list of additional features, you get one of the best Z170 motherboards I've laid eyes on with the M8F, but it does cost a pretty penny at $400 MSRP. Now, I'm not usually one to dwell on packaging, but I do think ASUS does a good job with theirs, and if we look at the box, we can at least get a good idea of what they're most proud of with the M8F. First off, there's that cross-chill VRM block for the CPU power delivery. Is it necessary to water cool your VRMs? No, not really, but it does make for a sweet-looking cooling loop if you're going that route, and I think ASUS positions the Formula as more of an ideal water cooling board versus the Extreme, which is more for maximum overclocking and world records, that sort of thing. And hey, if you're going to set up a VRM block, you can't go wrong having EK design it. It has G1/4 threading, and yes, it will work just fine air-cooled if you're not setting up a water cooling loop. Next is the RGB lighting, which I will come back to later after I actually set it up. Also, there's a pretty nice 802.11 AC 2x2 MU-MIMO capable 867 megabits per second Wi-Fi and Bluetooth card integrated. And of course, the ROG armor, a carryover from the thermal armor that ASUS originally introduced with their TUF series. The armor on the front is plastic, but there's nary a glossy section to be found. It looks amazing, as you can hopefully tell, and it even serves the practical purpose of providing some shielding for the more sensitive surface-mounted components on the motherboard. The armor on the back is a metal piece proudly emblazoned with the Republic of Gamers logo, and it's all done in a very well-matched dark gray finish. Specs beyond these I will divide into two categories. There's the standard stuff for this platform, such as the LGA1151 socket, the Z170 chipset. These things will pretty much be the same across most Skylake motherboards. And then there's the extra sauce that ASUS has added to make the M8F stand out from the crowd. Standard stuff includes a standard ATX form factor, 4 DIMM slots for dual-channel DDR4 memory, a pretty typical PCI Express slot layout including 2 gray x 16 Gen 3 slots that link directly to the CPU. This is for your single graphics card up on top, or a 2-way SLI or Crossfire configuration if you populate both, in which case both slots will run at by 8 and by 8 speed, since there's 16 total PCIe Gen 3 lanes available from a Skylake CPU. Also, when I say Skylake CPU in this video, I'm pretty much assuming that you're using a 6700K, as there's no sane reason to use any other Skylake CPU with a board of this caliber and cost. Also, you've got 3 total PCI Express Gen 2 by 1 slots for some additional expansion, and that lone PCIe Gen 3 by 4 slot at the very bottom, which could be used for 3-way Crossfire, but should not be because that would be dumb. It is a by 4 connection, and it's coming off the chipset that'll introduce some latency, and also this by 4 slot will only run at by 2 speed if you're using all of your SATA ports, since it shares bandwidth with SATA ports 5 and 6. More on that when I talk about storage in just a moment. Rounding out the motherboard connections, let's talk fan support, which is very good. 7 total fan headers on this board. All can be used for 4-pin PWM fan connections, but the 2 at the top are specifically for the CPU, and then a third one up there is made for PWM pump connection, which is an awesome feature for water cooling. And if 7 headers isn't enough, there's an EXT fan header down here in the bottom right that can connect up to the ASUS fan extension card, which is a cool little piece of gear, and I'm actually using it in Arctic Panther build back there, but unfortunately not included in the accessories, so you would have to buy it separately. There are also 3 2-pin thermal sensor connections at the top, middle, and bottom, and you can use those to place some temperature sensors wherever you feel that they are needed in your build. Along the bottom of the board, you've got front panel connectors, a couple of those aforementioned fan headers, a couple USB 2.0 headers, one of them which will also work with the ROG OC panel that is also sold separately, a USB 3.0 header, which is one of 2, the other is a right angle header, which is up here by the 24-pin power. The MEM OK button can be very helpful in getting tricky RAM configurations to boot. There's front panel audio there as well, of course, and the super important RGB header that lets you connect standard 50/50 RGB LED strips, 12 volts at 2 amps and up to 2 meters in length. Now, if you haven't noticed, I've kind of transitioned into talking about special ASUS ROG features, but never mind, let's go over storage. The single M.2 slot on the M8F is kind of hidden. It's behind this plastic panel down here at the bottom, which is nice if you want to hide an ugly green PCB SSD, for example, like this one, but kind of sucks if you really wanted to show off your sexy black PCB SSD, like if you just got a new Samsung 950 Pro, for example. It's a key M.2 slot for SSDs, supports SATA and PCIe as well as NVMe, and it supports M.2 SSD lengths from 42mm all the way up to 110. Now, I also noticed that while this panel is off, you can get at the motherboard battery, which is kind of nice, although it is hard to say if this plastic piece can be removed if you had a long graphics card installed in the top slot. This is actually pretty important for water coolers who would not want to disassemble their entire water cooling loop, or at least remove their GPU, if, for example, their M.2 SSD or their motherboard battery were to die. That would be a major annoyance. Anyway, there is a U.2 port right here next to the M.2 port, which is nice if you have an Intel 750 series SSD, again like I have an Arctic Panther back there, but sadly this port shares bandwidth with the M.2, so you cannot run both at the same time. You get 8 total SATA Rev 3 ports. The 4 on the left are SATA Express compatible with that extra little plug in them. I have yet to use SATA Express for anything, personally, but it is a good means of adding a couple USB 3.1 ports to the front of your system. You would need that accessory though, which again, is not included. I'd much rather have another M.2 or U.2 port than 2 SATA Express ports is what I'm really trying to say here. Okay, these black SATA ports are controlled by an add-on as media chip, and then the final 2 gray rightmost ports are natively controlled by the Z170 chipset, but using them will limit that x4 PCIe slot at the bottom to x2 speeds. These storage options will be more than enough for most people, but for a $400 board, my biggest letdown is that you can't raid up a couple M.2 Samsung 950 Pros or something like that for an insanely fast storage configuration. I mean, yes, you could get a PCIe to M.2 riser card and put it maybe in the last PCIe by 4 slot, or the second one if you're not running an SLI configuration, but it's just a much less elegant solution in my opinion, and it would limit the speed of that drive if you filled out all your SATA ports and you had it plugged into that bottommost by 4 slots. Also, that riser card, again, is not included in the accessory kit, so you would need to purchase that separately. Okay, moving up the right side of the board, we have a 24-pin main power connection. There's post LEDs that are right next to that as well. Those will light up as your system powers on, so if it hangs, you can easily look at the LED that's lit up, and it will easily let you determine the culprit of your post issues. Above that, there's a fun interactive area with power and reset buttons, as well as the ASUS Q-Code LED. That's for debugging more confusing post issues. There is also an LN2 header up here, although it's under this shroud. That is for circumventing the cold boot bug for exotic cooling gurus, and shouldn't be an issue that it's underneath this shroud, because if you're doing LN2 cooling, you're probably going to remove that whole shroud anyway. Okay, what am I forgetting? There is an 8-pin CPU power connector up here to feed juice to the high-end power delivery components for the CPU. That includes Japanese-made 10K black metal caps, NEXFET MOSFETs, and microfine alloy chokes. The audio is top-notch as well, with ROG Supreme FX 8-channel support, an ESS DAC, built-in headphone amp for up to 600 ohm impedance cans, Nichicon audio-grade caps, and the Sonic Studio 2 audio tuning suite to help you set up for streaming, voice chat, and surround sound. Okay, rear panel I/O. On the left are a clear CMOS and USB BIOS flashback buttons. I love USB BIOS flashback, by the way. It lets you update your BIOS without even having a CPU or memory installed. Next to that is connections for your 2x2 Wi-Fi antenna, DisplayPort and HDMI for use with your Skylake CPU's integrated graphics, 6 USB 3.0 ports in blue, 2 USB 3.1 ports, one Type A and one Type C, a PS2 combo port for those old peripherals you just can't seem to let go of, an RJ45 port for the Intel i219-V wired NIC, and gold-plated audio connections for mic in, 8-channel surround out, or the option of an optical Toslink SPDIF connection. Despite all of the words that I've just said, I have still skipped some stuff with this board, like that you can use network multi-gate teaming for your wired connection as well as both wireless channels to maximize your bandwidth, or the KeyBot 2 feature that lets you use your keyboard shortcuts on your keyboard to do motherboardy things like a quick overclock powering on, enabling XMP, or clearing your CMOS. There's a link to the ASUS page on the Maximus VIII Formula. It's in the description below if you want to double check it for other things that I might have missed. But for now, I just need to move on and set this board up for some testing. I will be right back. So I now have my little test bed all set up and good to go here. If you're wondering what I installed, first I did a 6600K, even though I told you guys that that CPU shouldn't go with this board, but it's my wife's CPU and I'm gonna overclock it. And I wanted to see how far it would overclock, so I thought this would be a good demonstration. Got a Hyper 212 Evo on top of that. Got a couple sticks of Corsair DDR4. This is their low profile series, their Vengeance low profile series, 2x8 gig kit there. I have that Plextor M6E 256 gig SSD that we're running off of, and then I've also plugged in this LED strip right here so that I can demo the RGB LEDs. This is from Cable Mod, so a big thank you to them for sending this over. Cable Mod has these, they're wide beam LED technology LEDs. This one has foam adhesive on the back and it's a 60 centimeter strip. They also have these available with magnetic backings on them, so if you have a steel case, I definitely recommend those because it's really easy to position them and whatnot. One last thing is that I'm connecting it up here with this little adapter piece that came shipped along with this, although it says ASUS compatibility adapter. This was shipped to me along with the LED strip since it was part of this whole demonstration thing, but you might want to make sure you get a hold of one of those if you're planning on setting this up for yourself. I want to demonstrate a few features of this motherboard. This is definitely not exhaustive by any stretch, but they are features that I particularly find to be useful. So the first one is going to be 5-way optimization. So in order to get at this, basically you need to get into Windows, get all your drivers and everything updated, and then you want to install the ASUS AI Suite 3. From the ASUS AI Suite 3, you'll have the option to click the 5-way optimization button. What this is going to do is do an automatic process with your system. It will reboot it a few times. It will first automatically overclock your processor, which is, in my opinion, the most useful thing. It'll also go through a couple more it'll optimize your power delivery, your digital power delivery. It will optimize your power savings features with EPU. It'll run through Fan Expert 3, which will reach out to all the fans connected to the system and tune them to the proper speeds. I only have one fan, so I kind of skipped that. And then lastly, there's also a thing that will go in and adjust your audio and your networking, which also I'm not going to dwell on too much. I'm mainly focusing on overclock here because I have the 6600K, and after running through all the procedures, it does automatic burn-in tests, like a quick burn-in test on the CPU, and this got me all the way up to 4.7 gigahertz with this processor. So that basically did a multiplier overclock to 47. It's about a 91% increase in CPU speed, as you can see here. And it's a pretty nice overclock. Even the voltage wasn't too bad. It's idling right now, but it's only hitting about 1.35 to 1.36 max, which is well within range. And I'm pretty happy with that. And I'm also very happy that the 6600K was able to overclock so well. I have now restarted and I am in the BIOS or UEFI, and here, let me hide myself so you guys can see what's going on here. Just going to do another quick rundown of some of the features in the BIOS that I like, because ASUS gets a lot of positive feedback about it. They put a lot of effort into it, and right now we're looking at easy mode, which it will boot into by default. So here's where you can get kind of a quick look at your CPU that's installed, the BIOS version, what RAM DIMMs you have installed. You get a CPU temperature histogram right here, which is nice, as well as some easy system tuning ability, functions here. You can switch between quiet performance and energy saving. I'm not gonna mess with those. Easily mess with your boot manager by dragging and dropping, which is also handy. Did I mention the mouse totally works here? You can also do XMP profile, or you can look at the fans that you have connected, including a call out there for that water pump header. Turn IRST on or off, that's helpful as well. And there's other cool things, like you can quickly access the boot menu with F8. I'm going to switch over to advanced mode by hitting F7. Over here is the extreme tweaker area, and here's where we can see a lot of the overclocking stuff done by the 5-way optimization, which was communicated over to the UEFI and is now engaged over here. Scrolling down, you can see just so many different functions and things you can mess around with. The extreme tweaker's paradise allows you to get even more in depth with stuff like FCLK and BCLK messing around. Anyway though, I'm not going to go into all that because I don't even understand what half of it does. Advanced monitor, you can monitor stuff like your temperatures and whatnot. That's always useful. Here's your boot area where you can do boot things. You can also flash directly from the BIOS with the Easy Flash and all that good stuff. A lot of this has been around before. Anyway, going back over to main. Wait, no, not main. Let's go back here to extreme tweaker. You might notice one other thing that I like here is that when you are selecting any of these different things that you can change, it will give you a little bit of information down here at the bottom, like select the DRAM operating frequency. So for certain functions that you might be more confused about what they do, I find those little tips to be extremely helpful. You also might notice that you can tap F3 on any particular thing that you've selected, and that will add it to this tab over here, which is my favorites. And my favorites you can pretty much set up however you want. So, you know, if you're going back into the UEFI over and over again to do a bunch of overclocking or something like that, you can do all of the settings right here so that they're quickly and easily accessible, and you can go ahead with whatever you might be doing for your overclock. Very, very handy. You even have a quick note function over here. You can just have a notepad thing and do stuff. And then lastly, wait, what was I gonna say lastly? Lastly, when you do hit F10, the other thing I like about the ASUS BIOS is it will tell you all the changes you've made here when you go to save and reset. I haven't made any changes, but it would list them all. So you'd be like, okay, here's exactly what I've done. And that is also quite handy. And finally, guys, I've set up a demonstration here for the RGB LEDs. So hopefully you can see the lit up points on the motherboard, which should be the ROG logo down there in the bottom right, the Formula logo right there by the CPU socket, and there's also a bit of extra lighting right up here by the I/O shield. I've also connected up that cable mod RGB LED strip, which is just sort of taped to the table right here, and I'm going to run through the Aura software, which is independent of AI Suite 3, which you can use to modify stuff. So of course you have static, and you can just take this little color wheel here, move it around and hit apply. Right now I have it syncing, so it's syncing the LEDs on the RGB header as well as the LEDs on the motherboard. So you notice everything just turned blue. You can do like a lighter blue over here, or we can go into the green range over here, or we can go up to yellow, or you know, anything that you can kind of find on this color wheel in between. At first I thought there was no way to just do white, but if you want white, you just click on this little guy over here. The sliders on the right just account for dimness, so you can dim everything down if you don't want it to be quite as bright, or you can make everything super bright, like that. Alright, so I've made everything nice and orange for the time being. Of course, if you don't want it just to be static, you can apply a breathing effect, which will cause it to slowly fade in or out. Can't modify the breathing effect, so what you see right now is what you get for whatever color you might do. You have a strobing effect, which I hate. I don't know, I mean, I guess it's another effect you can do, but strobing just turns everything on and off. That's super fun. You can also choose color cycle, which will cycle through colors. So if you want that RGB-ness going on, then you can do that. There's also a music effects ability, which I do have some footage of, although I'm not playing any music right now, so it won't do anything. But this will basically take your system audio and basically do some crazy effects with the RGBs for that. Also, this last one is CPU temperature, which I thought was kind of interesting. It will basically take your CPU temperature, or take a reading of your CPU temperature, which right now is off, apparently, no. It does your CPU temperature, and then it changes the color. So from green right now, which is where it's at since it's idling, and then if you put it under load, it'll turn yellow, orange, and red, which I thought was also kind of neat. Anyway, I'm going to unsync these right now, and let's put this back to just static for the main color on the motherboard. And then let's go down to the header. So you notice you can control the RGB LEDs on the motherboard, or you can control just the RGB LEDs on the header. This little button right here, although it's not labeled, you can click and it will pull up a little calibration tool. So you can hit next, it'll light up your strip, and you just tell it what color you're seeing. So that's red, that's blue, not green, so tell it that's blue, and then that's green, and that will do some basic calibration, which I thought was useful since there are multiple types of RGB LED strips out there. And then of course, if you just want to independently control the RGB strip by itself, you can do that here with all of the same color and temperature effects that I showed you just a moment ago. I'm gonna hit sync again and sync them both up, and that pretty much does it for our demonstration of the RGB LED options. In conclusion, the things that I like about this motherboard are, it is undeniably sexy and attractively designed. I try to be a function over form person first, but I know a lot of people are gonna buy this board just because of how it looks. The LED lighting is definitely done right. It is flexible, there's the expansion available, and it's not muddied by other non-changeable colors on the board. I also think that it's pretty much got everything you can possibly want in the Z170 board, especially if you're overclocking and water cooling, with the sole exception of storage freaks out there who want multiple M.2 slots with lots of hard drives attached. As for things I don't like, I was initially a little dismayed that the power and reset LEDs lit up white and don't change with the rest of the RGB colors on the board. However, you can go into the UEFI and disable these, which is a nice feature. That Q code red LED readout does not turn off though, and it would be nice to be able to do that. This is a minor complaint, however. I've already mentioned my disappointment with the M.2 support and the storage configuration, but again, for most people this won't be a problem, and look to X99 if you really want lots of extra storage peripheral connectivity. I also felt that for the price, it would have been nice to get a high-end accessory or two in the box. We don't necessarily need the OC panel, because that's pretty hardcore, but a PCIe M.2 riser card would have been nice, or an ASUS fan hub, maybe. Finally, for $400, you get a pretty sweet motherboard, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the M8F is no faster than any other Z170 board out there that might cost half the price, $200 or less, at least when it comes to the fundamentals like CPU and memory speed. So this is definitely a board for enthusiasts with deeper pockets, or those who are willing to take out a small loan or sell a kidney, which would totally be worth it. That is all for this review though. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button, and also you can use my Amazon link, which is down in the description, if you're shopping for stuff for yourself or for loved ones. It's a great way to help me out. Feel free to visit my store at store.paulshardware.net, where you can support me by picking up a shirt or a mug or a pint glass. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already, and as always, thank you for watching.